This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We're talking about the coup in the Maldives and the ousting of the president there. In October 2009, Maldives President Mohamed Nasheed held a cabinet meeting underwater in an attempt to bring attention to the dire consequences of global warming. Nasheed and 11 of his government ministers wore scuba gear and plunged nearly 20 feet into the Indian Ocean.
Actually trying to send our message, let the world know what is happening and what will happen to the Maldives if climate change is not checked. This is a challenging situation, and we want to see that everyone else is also occupied as much as we are, and would like to see that people actually do something about it.
That is the ousted President Mohamed Nasheed of the Maldives. Bill McKibben, you're founder of 350.org. Talk about what has happened this week.
Sure. Look, Nasheed, who I know a little bit, is a remarkable man for two reasons. One, he was, in certain ways, the first precursor of the Arab Spring, the Mandela of the Indian Ocean, you know, who really brought democracy to a country where it hadn't been before. Second, he's been the most outspoken head of state around the issue of climate change on our planet. He's provided the leadership, both symbolic and practical, that we desperately need. You know, until Tuesday, the Maldives was on target to become the first carbon-neutral nation on Earth. That won't save the climate, but it's the kind of thing that should shame the West into beginning to act itself. They also were, he and his government did a tremendous job of cooperating with activists around the world to try and bring attention to this most desperate of problems.
And Bill, the denial of the State Department that this is even a coup?
You know, it's so depressing to hear that. Let's hope that the State Department is getting new information. We're sending more than 30,000 signatures over there today that we've gathered in the last few hours from people around the world in the 350.org network who are incredibly upset at what's going on. I was at the Maldives 20 years ago at the height of the Gayoom thugocracy, and it was an unpleasant place. People with machine guns on corners and things. Malé, the capital during the Nasheed years, was a very different place. Open, vibrant, alive, democratic, humming with people trying to make a difference in the world. It's just the saddest of thoughts to think that we might be moving backwards, and that the State Department, I mean, one trusts that they're not, you know, that they're taking this seriously. Clearly, in certain ways, Nasheed was a thorn in their side because he kept bringing up the topic of climate change, a topic they're not that keen on. On the other hand, he, almost to a fault, was cooperative with U.S. efforts to try and do something, you know, what little we're doing about climate change. The State Department owes him, and I hope that they take this seriously.
Let me turn to a new documentary, The Island President, about Mohamed Nasheed, the one we just played a clip of, directed by Jon Shenk. This part looks at Nasheed's time as a political dissident under the old regime.
After graduation, I came back to the Maldives. By this time, the state had become more and more repressive. So we decided that it would be good to come up with a magazine.
Nasheed and I and few others began a publication called Sangu, which was a political publication.
It was talking about two things: corruption and human rights abuse. It was very critical of the regime. One night, at about 3 in the morning, they came to my house. They raided my home and took a whole lot of papers.
They came and they took him away. It was in the middle of the night. I mean, we had heard so many stories of what they were doing in the jails and all that, so it was terrifying in a way, really.
That was Mohamed Nasheed's wife.
I refused to give a confession. So because of this, I was taken to a corrugated iron sheet cell. The whole cell is 5 feet by 3 feet. You had a mat. That's all.
Mohamed Nasheed eventually went into exile but returned to Maldives to lead a fledgling pro-democracy movement. Here's another excerpt from the island present.
The Maldives was looking very much like an occupied country.
I would be lying if I tell you that I wasn't afraid. But and he keeps telling us all the time, you must get courage from each other. So stand by together.
Demonstrations were taking place all throughout the country. There were huge demonstrations in Faris Mathoda, Tinadu, Kimbidu, Ukros, and many islands. This was spreading like wildfire. It just finally came to a point that Gayoom had to relent, and he had to allow free and fair elections.
An excerpt from the new documentary, The Island President. We are joined by Jon Shenk, who's its director. This news, you've spent a good deal of time with the ousted president in the Maldives. This history, he has been held, he has been beaten and tortured by the former dictator. What about what's happening now, Jon?
Well, thanks for having me. When I arrived in the Maldives in 2009, a few months after the first ever democratically presidential held election there, it was a very strange place. On one hand, you had people who were clearly still looking over their shoulders from decades of having lived in a police state, and then you had, on the other hand, Nasheed and the new fledgling democratic government there, acting in the most open, kind of democratic, transparent way that you could imagine a good government acting. So what is happening now, in some ways, is obviously shocking and stunning, and to those of us who know Nasheed well, very sad. But not surprising, given just the kinds of things that we heard during the making of the film, which is that it's in a small country that was ruled for so long by an entrenched dictatorship. You had so much of society, sort of quote unquote in his pocket, or or at least fearful of repercussions that might occur, speaking out against him.
Well, I'd like to ask Paul Roberts, the advisor to the ousted president, Nasheed, about this, the Maldives and the WikiLeaks documents concerning the Copenhagen climate talks. In 2010, the Guardian newspaper published an article titled "WikiLeaks Cables Reveal How U.S. Manipulated Climate Accord." The Guardian reported that within 2 weeks of the Copenhagen climate change conference, the Maldives Foreign Minister Ahmed Shahid wrote to the U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton expressing eagerness to back the accord. By February 23, 2010, the Maldives ambassador designate to the U.S., Abdul Ghaffur Mohammed, told the U.S. Deputy Climate Change Envoy Jonathan Pershing his country wanted, quote, tangible assistance, saying other nations would then realize, quote, the advantages to be gained by compliance with the accord. According to a leaked cable, Ghaffur referred to several projects costing approximately $50 million. Your response to those WikiLeaks documents?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was in Copenhagen with Nasheed, and I saw him battling very vigilantly to get a deal. We were very nervous at that point that there would be no deal with this almighty row that was breaking out between America and China. And eventually we did get a deal. It was a very bad deal. It was a very poor deal. It was a compromise deal. But it was a deal, and Nasheed played an instrumental part in that and preventing those talks from collapsing. And then, since then we've had some baby steps forward in Cancun and Durban, which seems to sort of justify his decision to keep the UN talks on the road. But I mean, the last day of Copenhagen, Nasheed said publicly and in writing that the Maldives had written, had supported the Copenhagen Accord. So this was 2 months before these meetings. But one of the key parts of any UN accord is that some of the poor, vulnerable countries like the Maldives, but like many others in Africa, have to spend an increasing proportion of their budgets on adaptation. So in the Maldives, this is tens of millions of dollars on seawalls and beach revetments and stuff to protect these islands from the rising seas. What the Maldives was saying was that, if we can have some help, then that's great, and for other developing countries too, that needs to be part of the accord. And understanding there's at least $50 million worth of seawalls and revetments and water breakers that are in need of building in the Maldives alone. But I think one thing where some of the analysis is incorrect is that somehow the Maldives kind of used money as a bargaining chip to sign on to the accord. That's not true. We'd already signed on to the accord months or weeks before any of these meetings took place.
And did the U.S., Paul, deliver the money, the $50 million?
Well, we never asked them for $50 million. If you look at the cable in detail, what it says is we have $50 million worth of adaptation that we need doing, and so if anybody would like to be helped, that's great. And of course, one of the big things at Copenhagen was that there was supposed to be this transfer from the rich to the poor to help pay for these sorts of things. But no, Amy, no, they didn't deliver a cent. There's been no financing from the U.S. for any adaptation in the Maldives.
So what's going to happen now, Paul Roberts? We go back to different attempted coups. In Venezuela, Chavez refused to sign a resignation letter, which seemed very important to the coup makers. He remained in office. President Ousted in Haiti was being pushed to sign a resignation letter by one of the U.S. officials from the U.S. Embassy before he was ousted the second time. He did sign, and he was ousted and could not return. What's going to happen now to your president as we wrap up?
Well, we're very concerned. We think the new regime have got they always had the judiciary in their pocket. They've now stormed the state TV, so they basically have most of the fourth estate in their pocket. They now have the executive in their pocket, and they'll probably be able to get the legislature in their pocket as well. The only thing they don't have in their pocket is the fact that Nasheed is still extremely popular and likely to win any new election. But this is where I think there's another insidious thing going on. I think they are trying to arrest him. They've said they're going to have 14 cases for his arrest, and I think what they will do is they'll try and charge him with anything, with something, so he'll have a criminal record, and that will prevent him standing in any future election.
Well, we thank you very much for joining us. Paul Roberts, advisor to the Maldives. Can you say where you are?
I'd rather not. There's been arrest warrants out for all of Nasheed's former aides.
As well as yourself?
I believe so.
Paul Roberts speaking to us from an undisclosed location, an aide to the ousted President Mohamed Nasheed of the Maldives. Jon Shenk, thanks for being with us. His new documentary film, The Island President, has premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. Before we go, Jon, what will you do with this film now? It seems this is the point more than ever to get this information out.
Yes, absolutely. The film is being distributed in the U.S. by Samuel Goldwyn Films, and we're moving ahead with our release next month, and obviously trying to get the word out. I think that, one remarkable thing about the film is that it really is an unprecedented look at a sitting head of state. To my knowledge, there's no other project has ever followed a head of state with such transparent access. So I think just by the nature of watching the film, I think people will get a sense of who the real Nasheed is. It's kind of undeniable that he approaches his presidency and pretty much everything he does with just honesty and openness and a can-do attitude.
Jon Shenk, director of The Island President, and Bill McKibben, thanks very much for being with us, founder of 350.org, among his books, Earth, Making a Life on a Tough New Planet. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.